Hey folks, Steve Ramsden here, and this week I'm going to show you how to try a clever Hollywood trick of using a miniature model as the background for your scene. So you might have seen this effect used in some of the biggest films ever made, but you probably never even realized you were seeing it. A good example is Titanic, where they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by not building huge portions of the ship that they weren't going to use very much. They did this for at least two sets, the first class lounge and the giant engine room. For these scenes, they filmed their actors against green screen with a motion control camera and filmed miniatures as the backgrounds with a scaled down camera move to match. These passes are then combined and you don't even question the final result. Now these days a lot of films choose to extend their sets and scenery with CGI instead of miniatures, but if you're making a film and you are not a skilled 3D VFX person, with a bit of planning you can often get a pretty great result with detailed miniatures because you can shoot and light them for real. And it can be a good shortcut to filming something that looks expensive but isn't, which works for me as I'm always trying to do a lot with a little and create some impressive results on a budget. And if you want to see more fun DIY movie making experiments like this, then hit that subscribe button. So for this test, I got the background model shot while we were at a location to do some filming for a client. There was an old model there of a fusion power plant, which was big enough to provide some great detail, and the best part was, I didn't have to build it. It was, however, in a glass case which couldn't be moved, and this presented a real challenge to light and film it without reflections. It also included two model figures at the bottom which couldn't be removed, but my plan was to film another element such as a foreground character who could cover these up. I wanted to get a moving shot of the model to prove it was 3D, and if we had had our slider with us I would have filmed with that. But we didn't, so instead I did my best with a motorized gimbal and tried doing a slow push-in on the model on a wide lens to make it look as large as possible. As usual when filming miniatures, I used a high f-stop to keep as much in focus as possible, and shot at a higher frame rate to slow the shot down and smooth out any wobbles. Back in the studio, we planned to film me as a foreground character in front of a green screen and composite it together with the miniature model as the background. Now we had our slider, so we set it up very low to the ground as we would need to allow for how high the environment was meant to be, and for this reason I actually extended the green screen out onto the ceiling to cover me fully when looking up high. To help the angle even more, I also knelt down to get even lower in the frame, but you can't tell on camera as only my top half was visible and it just looks like I'm standing. So next we filmed a slow push-in on the slider towards me to try and replicate the move done with the model. Now in Hollywood they would have done both shots with motion control and some clever sums to work out the corresponding camera move at two different scales, but for this DIY version my plan was just to cheat a little bit and begin with the image scaled down smaller so it would look like a longer move. For this shot I just looked up at the green screen as if I was looking at something pretty amazing in a location. And then once we got a shot that looked good, it was time to open Adobe After Effects and see if it could be convincingly combined with the model shot. So the first thing I did was to load the two takes into After Effects and remove the green screen from the studio shot using Keylight and cut off the edges of the frame using the pen tool. This then just left the figure on its own, which could be lined up with the model using the position and scale controls, and this mostly concealed those two toy figures. A quick bit of basic color correcting with Lumetri Color made the figure a bit of a better match for the background, and then it was a matter of keyframing the scale and position of the figure until it looked like a good match for what the camera was doing in the model shot. Another thing that helped was to add a fake tilt-up movement in the shot. For this I parented both layers to a null object and then keyframed its position so the shot appears to tilt up. And then I hid this move by adding some cinematic black bars to the top and the bottom, which allows you more room to reposition the image in the frame. A little bit of camera lens blur added to the figure as the camera pushes in really close also just helps make it believable that the camera is focusing on the background instead of the foreground. Next I wanted to remove the top part of the model shot which reveals the ceiling of the room it was filmed in, so I masked out these areas with the pen tool and keyframed them over time. I chose a starry night sky to be a dramatic background behind this giant machine, and so placed this behind the model layer and also attached it to the same null object so that it moved with the other layers. Next, I began adding some fun pre-keyed elements like welding sparks that could fall from the ceiling, and a couple of flashes to light up various parts of the scene using masks on adjustment layers, with the exposure and warmth increased using Lumetri color. If you keyframe the opacity on these layers up and down, then it looks like reflected light flashing onto the machine from the sparks. I did the same thing on my characters layer. I duplicated it on top, made it brighter, and then faded this away as the sparks finish. This again helps sell that I'm actually in this interactive environment and not just kneeling in a studio like a strange person. I also tried drawing a mask around a coloured layer to create some dramatic rays of light that can also sit on top and fade in when the sparks appear. I just used these faintly with low opacity so they remain subtle, but they still helped add a little bit more interaction. Now, another good trick when using miniatures to make them look less lifeless is to add some small moving background characters in behind the main action. So I did the next best thing for a low budget experiment and found some willing extras on stock footage websites, which I could remove from their backgrounds and scale down to add into the scene. As the perspective of the model shot was quite tricky to match due to the wide lens, I kept them all in the extreme background and tracked the motion of the scene using the tracker panel to attach these elements to, and then they stuck nicely on top of the model layer. I put a couple of technicians at the back moving around and one up on a gantry doing some welding. Next, I added a smoky atmosphere element on top of everything just to add a little depth, did a bit more color grading to the whole scene with an adjustment layer, and added some smoke on each side as well. Then I also had a look at some lens flare elements, as again these are something that can just sit on top of all your layers and help to disguise any obvious joins. I timed a few warmer layers with the welding sparks and added the blue one on top. Now, this probably made the scene a little over the top and like something out of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, but it felt like that kind of scene anyway, so I just threw these in there too. I guess the main challenge when adding elements like these is knowing when to stop, which can be tricky, but basically these are all designed to add enough movement into the frame so that your eyes don't question the miniature, which is of course not moving. Finally, I couldn't get rid of this black material in the opening of the shot, as it was there when I filmed it to block out reflections in the model's glass case, so I covered it with a larger curtain element and just made it look like part of the shot, and it makes for a dramatic reveal of the scene behind. And then it was some sound design to finish with, and it was time to look back at the finished effect. Happy movie making, and I'll see you next time.